Coming up on this episode of the NHL at the Rink podcast, we talked to Gene Principe from Sportsnet all about the Oilers and this Stanley Cup final. Sean and I dig into what happened to the Oilers and Panthers in Game 3, look ahead to Game 4. We talk a little bit of trophies, a potential trade, and more. All of that on this episode of the NHL at the Rink podcast.
NHL at the Rink is presented by Skip, the official food delivery app of the NHL.
Welcome into another episode of the NHL at the Rink podcast. Sean, we're not at the rink. We are in the lovely hotel room of our producer, Bob Bender. There is a belt on the bed. There is. The TV's on. It's on mute. I don't even want to talk about what's going on with his luggage, but this is where we're recording.
Dude, this is how the sausage is made. I just got back from the laundromat. I haven't been to a laundromat since I was first moved to New Jersey. What a place. What a way to spend your morning. Let me tell you, it's better than any Stanley Cup final game. There were arguments. There was bad mouthing of boyfriends. I didn't even need to put my headphones in.
So the laundry that they have here at the hotel isn't good enough for you.
How long did it take you to dry your clothes?
60 minutes.
24 minutes.
All right. So your time is more valuable. I understand. I get it. So listen, hey. We are still here, obviously, at the Stanley Cup Final. We're in Florida. Game 4 is tomorrow night. That's Thursday night. Today is Wednesday, I believe, all day. Because at this point in the series, we do lose track. But today is Wednesday. We have Gene Principe from Sportsnet. Nobody knows the Oilers like Gene Principe from Sportsnet. Well, maybe other people do. Derek Van Diest, our colleague, knows the Oilers like Gene Principe. But Gene Principe brings it. We have him on this episode to talk Oilers. And I'll tell you what. They are obviously a big topic of conversation. 6-1 loss in Game 3. The Panthers, having won in double overtime in Game 2, blow out the Oilers 6-1 in Game 3. Sean, what are we going to see from Edmonton in Game 4?
Well, that's the big question, right? And that's why they're the topic of conversation, because you don't know what team you're going to see. They haven't been great yet in this series. I was shocked when Connor McDavid said after Game 3, we haven't played our best game, but it's coming. We're almost halfway through. Well, with overtimes, we are halfway through the Stanley Cup final. This is it, man. You lost last year. You're going to get to Game 4 and say you haven't brought your best game yet? It better come pretty quick.
Dig in, as he says, right?
Dig in.
Got to dig in.
Let's go, like Voight says from Chicago PD.
Oh, yeah.
Start digging.
Start digging. He's right, though. They have not played their best game in this series. He says it's coming. It needs to arrive. It has to be there in Game 4. And they're contemplating some changes here, the Edmonton Oilers, for Game 4. And honestly, after what we saw in Game 3, why wouldn't they be, right? I mean, you think about it. There's not much that they can do to change the lineup. Chris Knobloch said, we're contemplating a lineup change. If you ask me, that looks like on the back end. John Klingberg, to me, is struggling in this series. Troy Stecher can come in. Somebody was telling me from the Edmonton media was telling me that Troy Stecher has played really well this season with Darnell Nurse, so he's sort of like the Darnell Nurse whisperer. Maybe that's a change. There's a goaltending issue potentially. Could they be looking at Calvin Pickard instead of Stuart Skinner, who got pulled in Game 3? We talk about that with Gene Principe, but there's some talk there about changes that need to be made to their, that they're looking at their lineup. They need to change their approach, if you ask me. They are too worried about what the Panthers are doing. They are a little too concerned with the penalties that they believe the Panthers should be getting that they're not getting. The Oilers need to get back to playing their way.
They do. I don't think the lineup change is going to help. I don't know that it's going to hurt. Maybe it wakes them up. But again, we're at Game 4 of the Stanley Cup Final. What team needs to be woken up, right? And that's the part that I have trouble getting. And you say that, well, Connor McDavid says that they haven't gotten to their best game yet. And then you say it, and then everybody says it like they can.
I think that's a huge factor in all this. The Panthers are really good at playing. When they get to play their style, there's nobody better. They'll beat anybody in the league, and they'll beat them in any best-of-7 series when they're allowed to play their style. And that's the point where I brought up. It's not about, to me, the Oilers getting the Panthers to not play the Panthers way. To me, it's about the Oilers having more minutes playing the Oilers way. And it could be a back and forth. We saw that back and forth in game 1. We saw it in game 2. There were stretches where the Oilers were a dominant team playing the way they want to. There were stretches where the Panthers were a dominant team playing the way they want to. That's how you get two really close, tight games. That's how you get to overtime. And that's how you get a split, okay? But what we saw in game 3 was the Oilers completely losing the plot. They lost the plot from the start of the game. Brad Marchand scored 56 seconds into that game, and they never could find footing. Penalties on both sides did not help, but these were, Evander Kane whistled for 2 offensive zone penalties, and then he's part of the guilty party for too many men on the ice penalty. That's, he's trying. They're losing the plot. You've got to be better. You've got to be more careful. You've got to understand time and space. You've got to understand where you are on the ice. Offensive zone penalties will kill you, right? Then it gets to 2-1 because Corey Perry scores. Then 80 seconds later, this is the part that kills me, Sean. Sam Reinhart puts the puck in the net. It's 3-1. And Chris Knobloch said, when they scored there, that was it for us. There was 17 minutes to go in the second period, and it was a 2-goal game. How is that it for you? How does that? So they were off, tells me that he knew it. They were off their game from the very beginning, and it wasn't so much Panthers hockey. It was the Oilers getting just completely losing the plot, completely off of what they want to do, and then reacting to everything the Panthers were doing. And what do the Panthers not do? The Panthers don't react. They bait, they bait, they bait, they smile, they win.
Again, there's no credit being given to the defending champions. They'll play any way you want to play. You want to play skilled? They got skilled guys. You want to go in the gutter? They'll happily go in the gutter. Anyway, you want to play special teams? They'll play special teams. They're willing to do anything, and it seems to me that the Oilers have one way to play. Look, I think they're a better team than they were last year. I think they're stronger, tougher, better defensively, better on special teams for the most part, but they haven't shown it.
Well, I think the Panthers have one way to play, too. All of those ways that you said, we can go in the gutter, we can play skilled, it all still involves pressure all over the ice. It all still involves being physical and being aggressive on the forecheck. That's how they do it all. It's still that's the flat line. That's the base of their game. And I don't think the Oilers are going to be able to get them off of that game. But my point is the Oilers can get to their game more. We saw it in game 1. We saw it in game 2. The blueprint's there for them. But they know how to do it. They can do it, Sean. This is not saying no, that they can't do it because the Panthers are so good. We've seen them do it. They can do it. They did not do it in game 3. They have to do it in game 4 because if they don't, if we get another Oilers reaction, losing their cool type of game, well, this is a 3-1 series and it's probably over.
Let's not overreact either. Let's remember the Florida Panthers lost 8-1.
They did
last year. And who won that series?
That's a lesson that they take too. They understand. I think this actually works on both ends. That for the Panthers, they know what it feels like, and they also understand how you have to react to it, how you have to respond to it. I think the Oilers do too. I don't expect the Oilers to play a game like they played in game 3 and game 4. I think they're going to be way better. If you asked me to bet on it, I would say I think we're a lot closer to games 1 and 2. Game 4 will be a lot closer to games 1 and 2 than what we saw in game 3. To me, game 3 was a little bit of an aberration. And I know we look at the third period stuff, right? And this is, the Oilers deflecting away from what happened, but they say, well, the game's out of hand by then and all that stuff. But typically when that happens, 1 or 2 things will happen, and then you just skate out the last 8-9 minutes of the game, right? All right, we did it. It just kept happening. That's where they lost their cool too. And then after the game, they're talking about the officials. And that's concerning to me. They need to get back on task here. They need to get back on point. And I think with 2 days off and an understanding of the situation, I think they will.
I think the Florida Panthers know they're looking at a caged animal. I don't think anyone in that room, in Edmonton's room, wants to go into another elimination game with a mountain to climb.
Sean, another interesting thing that came up, and we brought this up with Gene Principe, too. He touches on it as well. And you'll hear that interview shortly. His colleague, Jack Michaels, asked Leon Draisaitl a question in a press conference, and I thought it was quite interesting. I'm curious your opinion on it. he said to him, Leon, do the Oilers need to be at 5-on-5 to be at your best, essentially? Do you need to play the game more at 5-on-5? And the point being was, because they're deeper. Their depth, they can roll their lines. They can get everybody going when they're at that. It used to be that the Oilers, when you put them on the power play, forget about it, right? And maybe the same thing will happen, right? But it was such a penalty-filled game, and you saw the Oilers get out of their game. I'm curious, do you think that? Do you think that the Oilers, with their depth now, front end and back end, are better served in a lower event game, in a lower event penalty type game?
Well, I think it allows them to dictate when their guys are on the ice, right? I think it allows them to say, here's how we're going to do this. When they get into penalties, they can't because guys are sitting for a long stretch. It changes a little now because Connor McDavid kills penalties.
A little bit, yeah.
But he's not being used at his best as a penalty killer. He's at a disadvantage. So, guys were sitting for long stretches of time, and I think that reflected in the game somewhat. So, yeah, I think they want to be 5-on-5. I think both teams in this series want to be 5-on-5. The Panthers' penalty power play was atrocious. They were at 4% at home. Ludicrous.
Yeah, that is nuts. It was actually 3.6% at home. It was like 1 for 28, I think it is, before they going into the game 3, and then they went 3 for 11. But they got 11. I mean, that's again. Listen. As we look ahead now to Game 4, like I said, I think the Oilers are going to be a lot different team, but the Panthers are going to be the same. Okay. Now I wonder, what do you think it's like? What do you think this is like for the Oilers? They're not going to be able to throw these Panthers off of their game. If they do, it's like a miracle happened, right? This is what they do. Matthew Tkachuk goads you, and he smiles at you. Like I said, Sam Bennett will bump your goalie a little bit. Here and there, he'll make a big hit, and then all of a sudden, boom, he's leading the rush scoring goal. Like, that's got to be so frustrating for the opponent that you get these guys who you can't stand to play against, and they're just doing the little things that gnaw at you so much, and then you can't do anything about it either.
And two things: Edmonton gave them oxygen.
Yeah,
they fed the fire. Like, that's a hard game to play. Nobody wants to get punched in the head while their arms are being held. But when you see what happens, you're like, I'm going to go get punched in the head again, but you're going to put a ring on my finger when it's over? Mm-hmm. I'll take that trade. The second thing, Jonah Gadjevich.
Jonah!
On our podcast 3 days ago.
Whatever day it was. Sunday, I think.
Told some great stories.
Go listen to that podcast, by the way.
And then became public enemy and a meme machine, not the meme machine like in The Longest Yard, but a meme machine in Game 3. He was everywhere. At one point, Darnell Nurse was trying to pick eggs out of his beard, but wasn't doing a very good job of it. One of the longest fights I've ever seen, and Darnell got the worst of it. But he was unbelievable. He got the game puck when it was all over. I mean, all the stars in that game, Gadjevich gets the game puck. And I think they cut the video off where at the end they said, and a hell of a job on the At the Rink podcast.
I think that absolutely was part of it. It's exactly what Brad Marchand said when he was giving him the game puck. By the way, I think the bell rang to end that round about 25 times, and it just kept going and going and going. It was something else, no doubt about it. But again, he comes up and he steps up and he'll deliver that, right? He will take on it. And credit Jonah Gadjevich. He doesn't take on a small guy. He takes on maybe the biggest guy on the ice in Darnell Nurse, right? So that's going to happen, but then you're going to have Sam Bennett lay a big hit on Vasily Podkolzin, go hit John Klingberg, go force a turnover, and then lead the Russian score on a breakaway. And he's public enemy. If that guy's public enemy number one, and how is he not? He's scoring every game. He's right in the face of the goalie all the time. He's baiting you. He's bothering you, and he's scoring. He's got to be public enemy number one. If I'm on the Oilers bench, like, you almost understand how you could lose your cool in that situation, but they can't. It can't happen again.
No, and again, I don't think it will, and if it does, they're in a lot of trouble. I just think it's going to be decided in different ways this time. Like, it's literally going to be who's mentally tougher because the stakes are ginormous for Game 4. Just astronomical. 3-1 and 2-2 are completely different propositions. 2-2, you're going home to Edmonton with a really short turnaround, no time to get over it, and it's a best of 3 with 2 games in Edmonton.
Yeah.
3-1, no time to digest it, no practice to readjust, and you go out there facing elimination.
Yeah, it's a tough spot. Listen, hey, we talked about it. Gene Principe from Sportsnet joined us. We talked all things Oilers in this series with him. So let's get to that. Here is our interview with Gene Principe.
Also known as Craig Button.
Yeah.
What I've heard in all the airports and lounges throughout Canada.
You know what? You're right. It's amazing because I think that, it's been an interesting storyline that Chris Knobloch has his doppelganger. I don't know if you saw. There's a pastor just outside of Edmonton that really looks like him. And I'm like, he really looks like Chris Knobloch. But when people tell me I look like Craig Button or vice versa, I think both of us kind of go, maybe a little bit. But it is a compliment. I think Craig is a very dashing, good-looking, middle-aged man, and I'm pretty close to him too. So I'll take it as a thumbs up as opposed to a thumbs down, even though I don't think people are on the button when it comes to that comparison.
When somebody misconstrues you for Craig,
Yeah.
do you sign his name? Because Craig does. He
Well,
signs your
you
name.
know what I do? I just kind of, it's probably easiest. I think if people are that sure of themselves, that trying to talk them out of it is more difficult. I remember last year's playoff run, I was outside Rogers Place, and there was probably a dad who must have been mid-30s with a young boy, maybe 8 to 10. He's like, come on, we got to take a picture with him. We got to take a picture. And the young boy, he didn't even know who I was, or Craig. He didn't know. He was going off his dad's lead. So, someone takes a picture, and the kid goes, Dad, who was that? He goes, that was Craig Button. So what am I going to say, right? I'm not going to say anything. So I just said, okay, thanks, enjoy the playoffs. So it's easier just to leave it alone. But a good assessment and good question there, Sean.
That is good stuff. Gene, by the way, I did want to point out that you look, as always, dapper in your suit. Sean and I barely look like we woke up this morning. and I don't know that I've ever seen you not in a suit. Do you wake up in one?
Yeah, virtually. I am a suit guy. I always feel like, and you guys do a great job of covering breaking news, and I always think if I'm at a rink covering Oilers generally, but maybe somebody else, and something happens that I would consider to be breaking news, I want to be prepared and say, well, we need you to go on camera, and you're like, oh, I'm not really prepared for that. So, and I think with some age or experience, I just feel more comfortable when I go to practices, when I go to game day skates. Certainly when I go to games, it's required. But, morning skates, I feel like I'm not properly dressed if I'm not wearing a suit. So it's my comfort level. And I remember as a kid, vividly, riding my bike and stuff like that. And I would always, when I would see, I'm Italian, we used to go to a lot of weddings. And I used to always feel so restricted when I had to wear a suit. And I would see kids, riding their bikes. And I think, I wish I was that kid, he doesn't have to wear a suit. And here I am now. I wear a suit hundreds of days a year, and I've actually found them to be comfortable.
There you go. All right. Well, you know what? It's certainly not breaking news that since the end of Game 3, the Oilers are saying, we're going to flush it. Yeah. It's one game. We'll move on. I think they can. I think they will. I think they'll be better in Game 4. But what do you know about this group and their ability to do that? What can you say about that?
Yeah, they've done it a lot. I thought, to be honest with you, I look back at yes, Game 1 of the LA series, but it was early when Philip Deneau scored after a really wonderful comeback for Edmonton until that last-minute goal. But I honestly thought for a moment that 0.4-second goal by Riley Smith in Game 3 of the Vegas series, I thought, okay, here we go now. Like, this is now 2-1. This is a real heartbreaker. Stuart Skinner had just come back after Calvin Pickard was hurt. I thought, this is going to tell me something about these guys in this group. And they came back and pitched back-to-back shutouts, including one in overtime. So I don't think there's any worry about their response. But as you know, beating Vegas and beating Florida and trying to respond to Florida is a different story. I mean, the Panthers are getting compliments on their game despite Edmonton being, upset with how things went, particularly in the third period. But I think, you kind of are losing the plot. Like the third period was the 80s. right? Games or period 1 and 2 was what they play now, and I think it was more about adjusting to that and what went wrong to put them in that situation as opposed to period 3. And listen, the Oilers, they're pretty tough too. Trent Frederic's a tough guy. Darnell Nurse, not afraid. Evander Kane is fine. I mean, they've got some toughness on their team too. It's just not really the way they play. It's not as natural for them. They'll do it if necessary. Where Florida, you listen to the Oilers and of course the Panthers, and that is more natural for them. That is kind of what they do and is part of certain game plans for them. I'm not sure it's really a game plan for Edmonton, but they will respond if necessary.
You know, you just mentioned Skinner, and we just finished. We're here at the War Memorial, which is beautiful, right next to the Florida Panthers practice rink. And the coach was just up there, and he says, I don't know who my goalie is going to be for Game 4. Do you?
Well, you know, I think what I think, I was thinking last night, let's say Bobrovsky had the Stuart Skinner night. We're not thinking Vanecek's going in, right?
No.
I don't think so, no disrespect to him, but it's Bobrovsky. Whereas with Edmonton, because they did it last year in the playoffs in the Vancouver series, they took Stuart Skinner out, put in Calvin Pickard. They did it this year in the playoffs, and Calvin, in fact, was hurt, as you know. Otherwise, who knows what would have happened, but they couldn't be much better off than they are, being in the Cup final, only down a game. So my belief is that he'll go with Stuart Skinner. I think one game where so if the Oilers played awesome and outshot them 45-19 and you let in 5, you might go, this maybe is something you would hang on a goalie. I don't think so. I think it was a team that didn't play up to their standard. So I would suggest if you're going to play the same lineup, which is what it looked like from the morning or from the afternoon skate, why wouldn't you play your goalie as well?
Well, and I agree with everything you just said, except I'm going to play devil's advocate on this, and I'm curious your thought on it. Because if you're contemplating the change, I think you make it now. And you see what happens, right, in Game 4. But if you wait too long, then you're going to go with the guy who is technically not your better goalie with potentially your season and the Stanley Cup final on the line. So if you think about it that way, I can actually see Chris Knoblauch making that change, right?
Yeah, because, you know, that's what they did 2 playoffs ago versus, Vancouver. They were trailing in the series 2-1, and Calvin Pickard came in and won to make it 2-2, and then lost Game 5. So they're down 3-2, a game away from elimination. Gutsy. Chris Knoblauch says, Stuart Skinner, you're going back in.
Yeah.
You're not sure exactly what you're getting. So for sure, I think, one of the things we said on the broadcast last night with Chris Cuthbert and Craig Simpson is, sometimes a goalie comes in to clean up and that's it. They're just coming in to clean up, give the starter a break, give him a little bit of a rest, mentally, emotionally, physically. But when Calvin Pickard comes in, he's not just coming in to clean up because he may potentially start again. So I agree. Both are options. I think that Stuart has taken them this far that he deserves another shot. Whether he has earned it, whether he'll get it, I would be probably in the 60-40, 65-35 Stuart over Pickard, but I wouldn't be shocked if Calvin's a starter.
Yeah, no, I can probably agree with those odds, actually. One of the things that was interesting, as we were just saying, we just finished up with the interviews today, and your colleague Jack Michaels asked this question. I think he asked it to Leon Draisaitl. Like, are you guys better in this situation as a 5-on-5 team? We always think of the Oilers put them on the power play, forget it, right? Yeah. It's lights out when they're on the power, and it very well could be. But when it's a game like Game 3 with a lot of penalties, do you think that the Oilers are better off if they're flatline at 5-on-5? Is that their game now?
Yeah, I would agree with Jack's question and Leon's answer. I think at this point, because the Oilers' power play hasn't been as dominant, it's still a good to very good power play, that I think 5-on-5, they roll their lines. They feel like they've got 4 good lines that they can play, and they're not worried about matchups, and they're not worried about, we got to get Leon and Connor in there all the time. Sure, offensive zone faceoffs, they're together, and they're going to take a majority of those. But there's some other good players, and I noticed it last night, even in the first period, and it was the same for Paul Maurice. I mean, they just weren't rolling their guys. I mean, it was, which is okay when you start to build up a big lead because you're always on the power play. I mean, Aaron Ekblad scored beautiful power play goal. So that's the other thing. It's not like Florida's power play is, 8.1%. So you got to be careful. And really, the other thing too is the PK for the Oilers is nowhere near what it was last playoffs. The numbers are skewed to the point where if I think you just looked at their PK percentage and goals allowed, you think there's no way this team is in the Stanley Cup final. But they are, because they've been able to work around that. So 5-on-5, I think you're happy with your best, which are two of the best in the league, going 5-on-5 against any line and any pair of defensemen.
I have to ask you about Corey Perry. We parachute in every year, and we're like, oh, what a marvel Corey Perry is. He does it 82 games, and then he does it in the playoffs, and he's 40 years old.
Yeah.
Like, are you surprised at this point? Because he was a one-year guy, and he earned another job, and he's probably earned another job now.
Yeah, yes and no. I think, before I got to, I've known Corey. We've all covered him since he got into the league. But boy, have I ever had a chance to get to know him in the last year and a half since he signed with the Oilers. This guy loves the game. He's a little older, taller, blonde-haired version of Brad Marchand. I mean, I watch Brad Marchand and I think this guy's 37 and he looks like he's 27. I mean, if you look back at some of the highlights from 2011 in the Cup final versus Boston, there's not a huge difference. And in some ways, he's better just because he's more experienced. So, no, not anymore. Yes, originally, but now my answer is no to Corey. And how can you not sign him? He's playing on the number one power play unit for the Edmonton Oilers. He's playing on the number one line, number one, 1A, whatever you want to call it, with McDavid and generally Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. Yeah, a little bit is that, because Zach Hyman's hurt, but he's been all over the place. But I would say in the last few months, he's been a top six forward a lot. And so whether it's Edmonton, whether it's somewhere else, I don't think, I know Corey's not ready to call it quits, and I don't think the league is ready to say goodbye to him either.
Yeah. It's funny that you brought Brad into that conversation, because I was watching the game last night, and there's all kind of mayhem going on, and you're watching the two of those guys, and I'm like, I would love to be a fly on the wall in the summer when they sat down together, because hockey players do that, and had a conversation about hockey. They're two of the smartest hockey minds I've ever met.
Yeah, and I think that's, we talk about their energy, their motivation, all the things that they have, but I think you nailed it. I mean, you cannot do something at this age in a league that's full of 20-somethings and some early 30-somethings if you're not smart. You have to have a certain amount of intelligence, and I think both those guys have it. And, we love our jobs, but everybody loves it differently. I might love it 8 out of 10, and Sean, you might be 8.5, and Dan, you might be
10 out of 10.
10 out of 10, especially with your bosses likely listening to this. But everyone's different. But those guys would be Dan Rosen. 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, you can see it, you can feel it, and they play like it virtually all the time.
Yeah. One guy we're not talking about in this series, for obvious reasons, is Zach Hyman. Mm-hmm. He's not playing in this series. Are we underestimating the absence of Zach Hyman in this series?
Yes, because, he got hurt in Game 4. Edmonton was able to, of the Dallas series, right? So you win one game and, you're happy and now you're getting set for the next one. But over the course of what now for sure is 5, most likely, I shouldn't say most likely, but the odds are 6.
Yeah.
And maybe we're going to 7 again. I couldn't agree with you more. I think the loss of a guy who had 70 goals combined last year, 54 in the regular season and 16 in the playoffs, and his leadership and what he provides the Edmonton Oilers, it is a big loss and harder to make up for in the playoffs and when you're playing the other best team in the league. Yeah. Maybe earlier in the playoffs it's a little bit different, but in this case, for sure, you would love to have Zach Hyman available to you and for you for the entirety of the Cup final.
And also he's always going to be around the front of the net.
Yeah.
So pucks get funneled there when he's in the front of the net, right? And he's not afraid of mixing it up in that area. If he were playing on the Panthers, he would be a perfect Panther, wouldn't he?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So it's a big miss.
Yeah, for sure. And he's maybe not as, I don't want to say as mean as Sam Bennett, but Sam's got that stare, right? Like he's a pretty intimidating guy, and he's had a wonderful playoffs. Zach's kind of an all-star nice guy. Doesn't mean he's always like that on the ice, but for sure, the Oilers have talked about listening to Cuthbert and Simpson about getting to Sergei Bobrovsky. Dan would be one of those guys that would at least try to get to Bobrovsky.
And Connor Brown called it last night in the blog we're doing with him. He called it the long game. The third period was the long game. It was time to send messages. That's what Zach does. He led the league with hits in the playoffs. But I wanted to ask you again about dropping in. We see this team, and I saw him for 3 rounds before this, so I had a pretty good idea. But to me, this team, the Edmonton Oilers, are exponentially better than the team that lost last year in 7.
I would agree with you. You know, we thought that was a great team, and it was for that version of it. But I'm with you on that. I think there's a little bit more experience. A lot of them had never been to a cup. Corey Perry had been to one. Matthias Ekholm had been to one and lost. Corey had been to a number of them and won one. It is a much better team. Here's the problem. Florida is also a much better team. And really, they're two, you know, it was Adam Henrique said, it's like a heavyweight fight, right? You take a punch, you give a punch. You get, on the ropes, and you get off the ropes, and then you're the one in winning the 10-9 in that particular round. And so last night, Game 3 was not a knockout punch, but the Oilers were down, and we're trying to get back up. And now we see what they can deliver in Game 4.
Well, you delivered here, Gene. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll look forward to Game 4. See what's in store.
Thanks, boys. Take care.
Great stuff there from Gene Principe. We really thank him for joining us. So, Sean, before we move on to some other news and notes that are going on around the league, like Calder Trophy, Norris Trophy, a potential big trade that's potentially, reportedly, in the process of happening. Allegedly. Gustav Forsling. I don't think Gustav. I liken it to Jacob Slavin. He's just not getting enough. Just doesn't get enough credit for the player that he is for the Florida Panthers. The same way Slavin doesn't get enough credit for the player he is for the Carolina Hurricanes. So I was looking at this, and I was talking to Forsling actually this morning after the Panthers practice. You know, obviously he's become their top defenseman. He's exceptional. Sliding to make defensive plays. The stick work is incredible. If you go back to the Matthew Tkachuk trade, right? Well, go beyond that. Gustav Forsling, remember, was traded by Vancouver, the team that drafted him. He was traded by Chicago. He was waived by Carolina. And then he lands in Florida, and he finally gets a bit of an opportunity. But really where it started to take off for him was after they acquired Matthew Tkachuk. And why am I bringing up Matthew Tkachuk? Well, in that trade, which is a franchise-altering trade for the Florida Panthers, they sent Mackenzie Weegar back to Calgary along with Jonathan Huberdeau. Mackenzie Weegar was Aaron Ekblad's defense partner. Game 1 of the Paul Maurice era, his first game, I believe it was against the New York Islanders, what happens? They put Gustav Forsling with Aaron Ekblad, and Forsling's been with Ekblad the entire time. It elevated Ekblad. Trading Weegar elevated, not Ekblad, Forsling, and his game has just taken off from there. It's kind of funny, the tentacles that come off of that Matthew Tkachuk trade, isn't it?
As you process that trade, clearly they didn't know Forsling was going to do that. So Weegar was their top defenseman, and Jonathan Huberdeau was a really good player.
He's had 115 points.
Yeah, 100-point player. All the credit he's gotten, it's still not enough because Bill Zito, their GM, was like, I'm not going to win. They won the President's Trophy. And they're like, we're not going to win this way. We're not going to win with these players. You know, when you talk about it all the time, you can like your players, but you can't fall in love with them, right? And you can't fall in love with the numbers. And Zito didn't, and it changed everything. And then Forsling takes a lot of the sting out of that trade by going from a twice-waived guy to a Norris Trophy candidate, in my opinion. He'll never be mentioned for it because the numbers aren't there. But the same reason Jacob Slavin's never won a Norris, and to me, that's criminal.
Yeah.
I think there's a lesson there for all these teams that have gotten really close and run it back. There's evidence. Go and look at what happened and look at it critically and don't just say, oh, we got unlucky. Like the Florida Panthers won the President's Trophy and got knocked out, and Bill Zito didn't say, oh, the numbers are really good. You know, it was just a little bit unlucky there in the playoffs. A puck bounces the wrong way. We had the most points. We're going to run back again. He was like, no, we can't win that way. We're going to get a new coach. We're going to get a new playing style. We're going to go get new players.
Well, I can tell you a team that ran it back after winning the President's Trophy, and they didn't even make the playoffs this year, the New York Rangers, right? I mean, won the President's Trophy last year, said, lost to the Florida Panthers. I mean, they lost to the Blueprint, right? In the Eastern Conference Final in 6 games after they had a 2-1 lead in that series, and they said, no, yeah, we're good. We're right where we need to be. This is the team we need to be. And almost ran it back entirely, except for a couple of changes. The Barclay Goodrow thing happened, and that was a big change, obviously, for them because of what went on.
And Jacob Trouba.
Well, but he ran it back. He was here still.
And then they got rid of him.
They tried to
and they tried to get rid of him before the season started and couldn't. And basically, if you talk to certain people, blew up the room.
Well, they did, and that goes back to a November message sent out by General Manager Chris Drury, reportedly, that Jacob Trouba and Chris Kreider were available in trades. Jacob Trouba gets traded to Anaheim, and now there are reports coming out that Chris Kreider could be on the move to Anaheim. Frank Saravalli had it first, and Pierre LeBrun said that he has to waive his no move or no trade to go to Anaheim, but there's interest there. They're talking about it. By the time you listen to this podcast, the trade might even be done. So instead of analyzing the why and or what could happen here, Sean, I think it's very clear after not making the playoffs last year with the change in coach, and now if they're going to look to move Chris Kreider, the Rangers realize, and they did this, and Chris Drury realized this last season too. It's why he moved off of Trouba. It's why he moved Capo Caco. They needed to change the core. They needed to change the chemistry, similar to what Bill Zito needed to do as well. I don't know that anybody's going to ever be able to do it as well as Bill Zito has done it. But it is the New York Rangers recognizing that things have to change. And Chris Kreider's 2 years left on his deal, $6.5 million per year. It opens up cap space. It opens up options. It changes things for the New York Rangers, and it certainly changes the chemistry and the core if he's out the door.
But there's not much coming back, I wouldn't imagine.
No, there isn't. I can't imagine there is because, you're trading a guy in his 30s who's not coming off of a good year, an injury-plagued year with $6.5 million. But the thing coming back for the Rangers is if the Anaheim Ducks take the full value of the deal, that opens up cap space for them this year. It opens up cap space for them next year. They can do things with them. If they get picks and prospects in return, they can move those picks and prospects in other trades to change what this team looks like, to build it more towards what Mike Sullivan's going to want, right? Their new coach, Mike Sullivan, what he's going to want. And it does change the chemistry, and it changes the chemistry in the room as well. So I understand it. I see it. And listen, Chris Kreider has been a terrific Ranger, right? He's an all-time Ranger. Never won the Cup. He's not the only one in New York that hasn't won the Cup, obviously. But his numbers are, very, very similar, in fact, to what Adam Graves was. With the Rangers, the difference being that Graves won the Stanley Cup in 1994 with them, but Kreider scored a lot of big goals. He's had a terrific career with the Rangers, but things come to a head and they have to change every once in a while, and I think that's the thought process here for the Rangers is as much as it's not so much the return, it's the cap space and the change of the chemistry in the core to go away from what they were doing, which they thought was the right way, and then it kind of fell off. Now you have to redo it and rejigger that a little bit.
But that's the chemistry you want to go away from?
I've always liked Chris Kreider as a player. I've liked him as a person. I think his game has turned a little one-dimensional. I don't think he's a very good 5-on-5 player right now. Maybe that has to do with some injuries, but he's gotten older. I think he's a very good power play presence, and he's a very good penalty kill presence. But the majority of the game is played at 5-on-5. And he has lost some at that. So I don't have a problem if they're looking to change and he's the guy along as part of change that they're looking to make.
Yeah, I can see that. But I also see when I look at the Rangers, he's the guy that cares. Sometimes you look at that team and you wonder, do they care? Right? I think that's a legitimate assessment of them this year. They certainly had the talent to go to the playoffs.
We'll see where that goes. There's a lot of talk for the summer on what these teams are going to look like right now. How about a couple of awards? So Lane Hudson. I'm not surprised. Are you surprised that Lane Hudson wins the Calder Trophy? This guy is dynamic. He's very Quinn Hughes-like, if you ask me. He's actually a little smaller than Quinn Hughes, but so good with the puck, so skilled. Not a surprise he wins the Calder Trophy as the Rookie of the Year.
First of all, the stuff that the NHL has been doing with these awards has been unbelievable.
Yeah, it's been good.
I don't know if you saw the video of him getting surprised. It was supposed to be a surprise party for him being nominated, and then Phil Pritchard brings the trophy out of the back of the house, and the dad is almost ready to cry right on the microphone. He said, "I'm hard on the outside and soft in the middle." That's me too, Dan. You know that. You say he's a little Quinn Hughes. To me, he's going to go on a similar run to Cale Makar, who won the Norris Trophy again. Cale's got new competition in the Norris Trophy. It's not just going to be Quinn Hughes. You know, I think Lane Hutson's going to join that conversation pretty quickly.
I think Cale Makar's a unicorn.
Yeah.
Because he is incredibly skilled, such good hands, so quick, and he's big, and he can play physical, and he's such a good defender. Like Hughes and Hutson, they're super skilled, shifty, but they're smaller, all that. Makar does all of that, and he's big. Like he can play big, he can play small. Like to me, that's why he's such a unicorn in this league for all of the ability that he has. We see other big, skilled defensemen, but they're not like this guy.
No, I agree with that. But I do think that there's additional young players that are coming up that are going to continue to push Cale Makar. He's going to have to be better to keep winning Norrises.
Yeah. Well, I think one of those guys is in Minnesota, Brock Faber, right? Because he's another one that can play physical. He's just not. That's what makes Makar so good. Is like he could be a 100-point defenseman and be an elite defender. Erik Karlsson was a 100-point defenseman. I don't think anybody's ever going to say Erik Karlsson is an elite defender, right? But Cale Makar has some Jacob Slavin and Gustav Forsling in him, and he's also got Quinn Hughes and the other guys in him, and he's going to win this award a lot.
And before we get out of here, a big shout-out. TJ Oshie announced his retirement this week. Tom Galitti, our good friend on our staff, was there to cover it. Great player. But you and I were both there in Sochi for maybe the defining moment of his career, where he got the nickname TJ Sochi for the shootout against the Russians. His career was certainly more than that. He won the cup with the Capitals, and he was such an integral part of their team once he joined them, and of the community. So, a little shout out to TJ before we get out of here.
Yeah, listen, really good player. Not a Hall of Fame career, no. Really good player, a really nice send-off, by the way, in Washington by the Georgetown Fountains, where they splashed around, if you will, with the Stanley Cup several years ago. Played 1,000 games, represented his country, has some incredible stories to tell. What an incredible bond with his father. And that story, really, always there, top six forward for years, grinded out a very long and successful career. So, it's unfortunate he goes out probably a little too early, though, right? I mean, it goes out because of injury. He could still be, if he was healthy, he's still young enough to keep playing, and he would still be an effective player for them.
He's Chris Kreider. They'd be trying to trade him to Anaheim.
Maybe. Well, I don't know. But no, good shout out to TJ Oshie. This was a lot of fun. We thank Gene Principe for joining us. We got Game 4, Stanley Cup Final coming up. It's Thursday night at Amerant Bank Arena. It's obviously quite a big swing game in this series. We know we're going back to Edmonton for a Game 5, but will we be back here for a Game 6? A little bit will be determined in Game 4, potentially. So enjoy it. And as always, the NHL At The Rink podcast brought to you by Skip. Skip to the good part. You get groceries, meals, and essentials delivered right to your door on Skip. Enjoy the hug.